You ride into silence, but the silence is not empty. It breathes. It groans. The air is heavy, thick with the rancid sweetness of rotting flesh. Before your eyes, the land rises not with forests of green but forests of bodies. Thousands, tens of thousands. Each corpse has been lifted high on a wooden stake, their faces slack in death, their mouths open in eternal screams. The summer sun has turned their skin the color of ash and leather, their blood darkened to tar that drips down the poles into the soil. The flies come in black clouds, lifting and settling like waves, until even the sky itself seems diseased. The closer you look, the worse it becomes. This is not chaos. This is not the mindless brutality of war. No, this is a pattern. Every stake is measured. Every body is aligned. Circles within circles. Spirals that coil around the walls of Targovist like some great ritual carved in flesh. This is geometry. This is architecture. This is method. Your horse shies at the sight, nostrils flaring, hooves striking at the blood-soaked earth. Even seasoned soldiers gag, their faces pale, some dropping their weapons as they stumble backward. Hardened men who once laughed at death are broken here, their courage undone by the scale of it. The moans of the dying drift on the wind, weak but unmistakable. Not all of them are corpses. Not yet. And then you notice something that freezes the marrow in your bones. Among the forest of stakes, bodies are not just arranged in circles. They spell words. Words in Arabic. Words that only one man, the Sultan himself, was meant to read. Each letter written in human flesh, each message carved into the air for him to see. What kind of mind would do this? What kind of man turns human bodies into language, into symbols, into a sermon of terror? You stand in the forest of the impaled, and you understand. This was not madness. This was memory given shape. This was order, calculation, design. And once you have seen it, you will never forget it. The forest lingers in your mind, but to understand how such horrors were born, you must go backward, to the moment when a boy was taken from his father's house and delivered into the heart of an empire. It is the year 1442. The walls of Constantinople still stand, though not for long, and the Ottoman court glitters with silk and steel. Into this palace come two children, brothers. Vlad, the older, sharp-eyed, restless. Radu, the younger, delicate, almost angelic in beauty. They are not guests, though they are told they are. They are not students, though they are dressed as such. They are hostages. Each day begins with lessons. Turkish recitations, the rhythms of Islamic theology, the recitation of laws, the correct way to bow, to kneel, to kiss the hem of a robe. These things the boys can endure. But nightfall brings a different curriculum, one that no chronicler records in detail, but which echoes through the silence of history. The footsteps in the corridors are predictable. A drumbeat Vlad comes to dread. The guards come for him. They do not always come for Radu. Vlad fights in the first weeks. He claws, he kicks, he screams for his father, for God, for anyone to hear. But resistance only prolongs the agony. Soon he learns what every captive learns. Compliance buys mercy, though never safety. His mind detaches, floating above the body that is no longer his. He watches from the ceiling, as if the boy below is someone else entirely. The lessons he learns here are not the ones intended. Power, he realizes, is not in words or books. Power is in control of others, of the body, of suffering. To survive, he memorizes every touch, every humiliation, not to forget them, but to use them. Behind another door, his younger brother chooses differently. Radu smiles, he adapts, he accepts the silk garments, the jeweled daggers, the kindness of those who train him. Where Vlad seethes with rage, Radu blooms under the attention of his captors. Soon he is favored by the Sultan's son, Mehmed. Poems are written for him, promises whispered in his ear, protection granted. Radu learns that surrender can be its own weapon, that affection, even in chains, can bring privilege. His path bends toward survival by submission, while Vlad's path sharpens into survival by resistance. The palace has divided them as it was designed to do. Brothers now strangers, their eyes meeting in the corridor only briefly. One draped in silks, the other scarred by defiance. Radu walks toward comfort, Vlad toward rage. And in that split something is born. The child who once trembled against the walls of the palace now understands the truth. In this world you are either the hand or the victim beneath it. There is no middle ground. What Vlad learns in captivity will never leave him. The pain becomes memory, the memory becomes obsession, and the obsession becomes design. Decades later, when men slide helplessly down stakes in forests of his making, they are not simply victims of cruelty. They are echoes. Each impalement is a reenactment of a boy's humiliation. Inverted, perfected, industrialized. What was once done to him, he now does to others, with precision his tormentors never imagined. This is where the monster was forged, not in Wallachia, not in war, but here in gilded rooms where children were broken and rebuilt in the name of empire. If you've followed this far into Vlad's captivity, then you already see the shadows that shaped him. Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles now, or else tell us in the comments why you would turn away from the truth of where monsters are truly made. Years pass, and the boy who once pressed his fists against marble until they bled returns home. Not as a child, but as a ruler who carries within him the blueprint of cruelty. Now a prince, Vlad summons craftsmen to his court. They believe they will be asked to build walls, bridges, fortifications to defend his realm. Instead, they are led to a workshop filled not with tools of statecraft, but with instruments of death. The orders are precise, almost architectural. The stake, he commands, must not be sharp. A sharpened tip kills too quickly, piercing vital organs and ending life in hours. No, the point must be dulled, rounded just enough to push the body aside, to slide between organs to keep the victim alive. Death should not come swiftly, but slowly, creeping inch by inch over days. The stake must be tall enough for the body to hang suspended in agony, but strong enough to bear weight without splintering. Vlad inspects the wood himself. He runs his fingers along the grain, rejecting pieces with flaws invisible to anyone else. Each pole must be straight, each circumference exact. He orders the bases reinforced with iron caps so they will not crack. And before use, the wood is soaked in oil, not for preservation but for smoothness. The victim's descent must be steady, unbroken, drawn out to the very limits of the human nervous system. It is cruelty refined into a science. This is not execution. This is theater. When the forest of stakes rises, it is arranged with care. Concentric circles, spirals, messages spelled out in flesh. Chronicles describe entire valleys turned into pages of terror. Each impaled body a word in Vlad's dark language. Turkish prisoners form one ring, corrupt boyars another, criminals yet another. To the eye of a passerby it might seem random, but to those who knew his history, every pattern had meaning. Every angle of suffering was a sentence in the story he wished to tell. I was broken once, but now I break you. Even hardened armies falter when they see it. Chroniclers write of Ottoman soldiers, men trained to march across continents, vomiting at the sight, some weeping openly, some refusing to advance. In 1462, Sultan Mehmed himself turned back at Targovist after encountering 20,000 of his men impaled in perfect formation. This was power without words, strategy without swords. A city defended not by walls, but by the sheer magnitude of human agony displayed as a warning. What Vlad built was more than death. It was memory made visible, trauma turned into spectacle. His stakes spoke louder than armies, carrying a message every soldier understood. To cross this land is to enter a world where suffering itself has been weaponized. If this dark precision fascinates you, yet you refuse to subscribe, then at least confess in the comments. Why linger in the forest of the impaled and pretend you do not belong to Cursed Chronicles? The stakes were not only for soldiers. They were for nobles, for merchants, for women and children. No rank, no title, no station in life placed one beyond the reach of Vlad's arithmetic of cruelty. And in this arithmetic, betrayal was the highest crime. It is Easter Sunday, 1457. The boyars of Wallachia arrive dressed in their finest silks, their wives beside them, their children trailing behind. They believe they are summoned to a feast, to celebrate the resurrection of Christ with their prince. The tables gleam with food, with gold, with wine. The mood is festive until Vlad gives the signal. In an instant, the doors are barred, soldiers enter, and laughter dies in throats. He accuses them of treachery, of plotting his father's death, of conspiring with his enemies. There is no trial, no chance for defense. By nightfall, hundreds of boyars hang impaled outside, their bodies swaying in the wind like ornaments of decay. Their children are marched away, forced into hard labor until they collapse. Vlad has delivered his message. Loyalty is not requested. It is demanded. The nobles who once mocked him as a hostage child now scream as subjects in his theater of pain. Yet cruelty was not only for the highborn. Among the common people, Vlad ruled with a different kind of terror. One story, whispered across generations, tells of a golden goblet placed at the public fountain in Targovist. It was solid, gleaming, untouched. Anyone could drink from it, but none dared steal it, for they knew what punishment awaited. And so the goblet remained, year after year, unmoved. Crime itself withered under the shadow of impalement. Fear created order where no law could. But the punishments that revealed the deepest scars were those reserved for women. Trials for adultery were no simple proceedings. Vlad demanded details, questions that burned with obsession more than with justice. If found guilty, the woman faced not only death but spectacle. The stakes chosen for them were heated in fire until they glowed. Their bodies were exposed, their shame paraded before crowds, and their families forced to watch. Fathers, brothers, and husbands stood powerless as those they loved screamed in agony. For Vlad, this cruelty was personal. In every punishment of women lay the echo of his own childhood humiliation, when his body had been taken from him in the Ottoman court. Each scream was not only a sentence passed upon them, but upon the memory of his own violation. What he could not undo in himself, he inflicted upon others, ritualized, theatrical, merciless. This was not law. This was not justice. This was Vlad's private war with the ghosts of his past, waged on the flesh of his people. And still the Chronicles preserved it, not as myth, not as rumor, but as history too dark to ignore. You are hearing history that most turn away from, truths left buried in the margins of Chronicles. Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles now, or explain in the comments why you would rather silence the past while it still screams for remembrance. The banquet hall of Vlad's court was not always confined to stone walls. Sometimes, the feast was set beneath the open sky, in gardens where flowers had been replaced with groves of the dying. Long wooden tables were laid between rows of steaks, silver plates gleaming, goblets brimming with red wine that caught the light like liquid rubies. Nobles sat stiffly, their hands trembling as servants poured wine and set meat before them, for they knew the true entertainment was not the food. It was the orchestra of agony that surrounded them. Vlad would sit at the head of the table, calm, composed, cutting his food with deliberate grace. Around him, victims writhed, moaned, and gasped their final breaths. To the horrified guests it was unbearable, but to Vlad it was communion. He raised his goblet as though toasting a friend, eyes fixed on a man sliding inch by inch down his steak, thanking him for his company. Each bite of roasted meat was timed to a scream, each sip of wine to a death rattle. Where once he had been forced to watch others take pleasure while he suffered, now he inverted the ritual. He consumed life while death consumed those around him. One account speaks of Ottoman ambassadors who refused to remove their turbans in Vlad's presence, claiming it was forbidden by their custom. He honored their devotion in the cruelest way imaginable, by impaling them with their turbans still fastened to their heads. Among them was one who, against all odds, clung to life and voice long after the stake pierced him. His throat rasped out broken words in Arabic. Vlad silenced the table with a gesture. The man was not pleading for mercy. He was praying. Not just any prayer, but one that Vlad remembered from his childhood in the palace of Constantinople. A prayer whispered over him in the darkest nights when he had no escape. The sound struck him like a blade. His hand crushed his goblet, mingling his blood with the wine. In that instant, the feast became a battlefield inside his mind. He ordered the man carefully lowered, not out of mercy, but so his life could be prolonged. He had him cleaned, wounds tended just enough to keep breath in his body, then raised again on a new stake angled to spare his voice. And for days Vlad demanded he sing prayers, songs, the hymns of the palace. He forced the man to recreate the soundtrack of his own abuse, while he and his nobles dined beneath it. This was more than cruelty. It was ritual. The meal became an inversion of his childhood helplessness. Where once he had been the silent victim, he now feasted as master, binding suffering to his table like a dish prepared for his pleasure. Each moan of the dying, each choked verse of prayer, became a seasoning to his food, a bitter wine poured into his memory and consumed until nothing remained but the echo. Vlad did not simply kill. He orchestrated. He did not simply punish. He staged. His table was an altar, his guests unwilling participants in a ceremony that blurred the line between nourishment and decay. In these feasts among the impaled, he found a twisted satisfaction, the power not only to end life, but to choreograph the manner of its ending, and to drink deeply of the fear it created. If you have walked with me this far into Vlad's banquet of horrors, then you already belong at this table of history. Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles now, or else tell us in the comments why you would rather sit in silence while the past dines without you. Not every punishment ended with a stake. Vlad's imagination reached into places darker still, pulling methods of torment from the shadows of his own memory and reshaping them into spectacles meant to terrify entire nations. One such method began deceptively soft. A prisoner was bound to a wooden frame, his feet bare, his body immobilized. Servants washed the skin carefully, almost tenderly, before smearing it with coarse salt. Then goats were led forward, their rough tongues drawn irresistibly to the taste. At first, the licking produced laughter, nervous, genuine, even absurd. But the goats did not stop. Hours passed, and what began as tickling became torture. Layers of skin wore away, raw flesh exposed, salt grinding into wounds until laughter dissolved into screams. Vlad sat close, his gaze fixed on every expression, waiting for the exact moment when sensation shifted from pleasure to agony. It was a threshold he knew too well, one he had crossed as a child, and now he watched it unfold again and again on other faces. Another invention was the great copper cauldron. Crafted by skilled metalworkers, it could hold several men at once. Their bodies submerged in water, their heads protruding through perfectly measured holes in the lid. Fires roared beneath, slowly bringing the water to a boil. The screams rose first in a chorus, then died into hoarse whimpers as throats collapsed under strain. But for Vlad, the boiling was not enough. Families of the condemned were summoned, forced to stir the water, to participate in the destruction of their kin. In the Ottoman palace, he had been made complicit in his own degradation. Now he returned the lesson with merciless precision, binding others to the same chain of guilt that had shackled him. There were collective punishments too, designed to erase entire communities with a single act. Villages accused of disobedience were burned, their survivors impaled not randomly but in patterns visible from the roads, warnings carved into the very landscape. Merchants who cheated were boiled with their ledgers and coins. Priests who betrayed vows were made to suffer in ways that mocked the sacraments they had once performed. Every punishment was a mirror, reflecting back some betrayal, some humiliation, some memory that Vlad could not escape. These were not random cruelties. They were reenactments. What had been done to him in secret chambers of marble and silk, he performed in public with wood, iron, and fire. His tormentors had taught him that power meant violation, that control meant survival. He took that lesson and raised it into a kingdom of fear, turning his trauma into the machinery of state. In every scream he orchestrated, Vlad was chasing something, the erasure of his own helplessness. Yet no matter how elaborate the punishments became, no matter how many voices cried out beneath him, the silence inside himself remained unbroken. If the psychology behind such horror grips you, if the shadows of the past reveal more than blood and cruelty, then subscribe to Cursed Chronicles. And if you refuse, Then at least confess in the comments why you would turn away, while history stares back with unblinking eyes. In the winter of 1476, the story of Vlad reached its end not in triumph, but in ambush. Betrayed by nobles who feared him as much as they served him, surrounded by enemies who longed to see him fall, he was struck down in the forests he once commanded. His body was hacked apart, his head severed from his shoulders. That head, once crowned, once feared, was placed in honey to preserve it, then carried across the Danube as an offering to the Sultan of Constantinople. There it was displayed on a spike, the conqueror's trophy of the man who had turned impalement into a language of terror. Yet even in death, Vlad refused to vanish. His body was gone, but his legend grew. Chroniclers painted him as both savior and monster, protector of his land yet butcher of his people. In German pamphlets, he became the nightmare of Europe. In Eastern tales, he was remembered as the prince who brought order through cruelty. And in centuries to come, his shadow lengthened still further, reshaped into myth, into the figure the world would call Dracula. But behind the legend, the truth remains darker than any tale of vampires or fiction. The punishments that scarred his name were not born of simple bloodlust. They were memories, twisted into rituals of power. Each stake, each cauldron, each inverted feast was an echo of what had once been done to him, transformed into theater for all to see. His cruelty was unforgettable because it was not random. It was memory, sharpened into weapon, raised into spectacle. The forests of the impaled have long since rotted. The bones return to earth. But the shadow endures, carried in ink, in whispers, in the dark corridors of history where trauma never dies. It only changes shape. Vlad's reign is over, but his horrors remain. Too terrible, too calculated, too unforgettable to fade. If these shadows compel you, if you feel the weight of history pressing in, then subscribe to Cursed Chronicles. And if you will not, then tell us why in the comments. Why you would turn away when the past still watches, still waits, and still remembers.